Well, I do want to say that I come on here again just to show a few more steps as to how the nativity is carved. I do have a little story to tell you about this, though. You probably noticed in past videos I've either been clean shaven or just had the mustache, but I used to wear a goatee when it was all dark, and then there came the time when at one time I started to get white whiskers on one side, so started keeping it shaved off just to make it all look the same. Now I started to get a little white whiskers on both sides, so it kind of looks a little bit more the same on both sides. Tried to grow it out just to show a little bit more of that. Before I go further, I do want to say that there's just little steps are taken on the nativity here, and I showed you the last time around how I carved out the triangles in the backs to the tops of Mary and Joseph's head. But this time around I've drawn a line where you can see a little line making a triangle at the top, and these little lines I've drawn out around here. So we're going to start carving from about this point up to here and take off what's on the back there. That's the step here we're going to talk about. So I've got little interesting information to share here as of this evening. So as I've mentioned before, I'll say these knives, they're just getting to where they're just getting old, needing to be replaced. So I'm going to be taking care of that one day, be taking care of that as soon as I can. So, you know, it's getting to the point where they get a little harder to sharpen sometimes when they get real thin like that. Once they've been sharpened so much, they start to wear real thin. So that's when it comes to a point where a replacement might be a necessity. So I've come on here to take care of this. And I do want to tell you all little stories about whiskers. You know, thing of it is that when I was probably about 17 going on 18, I started to get some straggly whiskers on my chin. And in those days in the 90s, teenage boys, if they were able to grow facial hair, especially goatees, they showed them just to show they had hormones. That was something that in my days I unfortunately couldn't do, because I worked a job at Pizza Hut where, you know, you had to kind of be clean shaven to work there. Mustaches could not go below the upper lip. Sideburns could not go below the bottom of the earlobe. And for sanitation reasons, no beards or goatees were allowed in those days. So that was just kind of the way it worked then. So in my days, I was never able to go to school and do that. But I will say that even though as a teenage boy I couldn't grow whiskers to show hormones, I will say that as an old man now, I finally do get to grow white whiskers to show that I'm wise. Sometimes they say too, you know, that when you start getting little white places like that in your hair and your beard, it means you're getting smart, like the Bible saying that gray hair is a crown of splendor in the book of Proverbs. So that's one of those things where we say that we just know that we all get a little wiser as we get older, and sometimes, just sometimes, depending on how we age, what we go through in life, there's going to be things that are going to come to us all different ways, different times in our lives. And so it might have been to my misfortune that there were the days when I had to work a job as a teenager and couldn't do what a lot of teenage boys could do. But I'd say that sometimes a little work comes a long way and takes us down a little further and makes us get a little grown. There's probably been a lot of things I've been able to do as a grown man that were probably quite nothing like anything I didn't get to do as a teenager. So, That's kind of one of those things where I believe that things change a little bit in our lives, and even when we get older and realize we have quite a past that cannot be changed, it really makes a new little thing of us and makes new characters and realizations of us. There's probably a lot of things in life that at certain ages in my life, certain grades in school, and certain times, I might not have gotten to do like other kids did. And so I'd say, it's just one of those things where you kind of grow up to be a man, and then as an adult, you just find out there seems to be a little bit more you get to do, a whole lot more you probably never realized one day you'd do. There's been places where I went to school and there were rebels on the campus. Sometimes I got with the wrong bunch of kids, and sometimes I ended up kind of having things stolen from me. Once or twice I probably got almost killed by this one group that was out there, but they were a whole different story, when they grew up, and they probably dropped out of school and heard stories about them having run-ins with the law since then. So it's like the things we see in life that stress us to the point where we don't know much what goes about us, what comes our way, and we see that a lot of sad stories happen to people in life. I still remember the time when I was 29 and at a 10-year high school reunion, talking with some people there, and there was a certain old group of rebels from back in school that we had our little discussions about. We had our little discussions about how unpredictable that crowd could be. There was a time when I was around them, got a backpack stolen by one of them. It kind of had my textbooks in it and had some of my notes and stuff in it, had some of my schoolwork in it, maybe a personal item or two, but nonetheless, a kid snatched the backpack and threw it out in the road, and another car came by and picked it up. And from what I heard, it was like months later, it was found in a nearby shopping center, and a man found it in there and returned it to us. In this world, people steal things. In this world, people vandalize things. A lot of things come and go, even at the cost of us. This was a little thing that came and went like it did, and when we saw the assistant principal at the school work the whole thing out between us, because sometimes there were those kids who they sort of did the things where the system had to talk to them. I've known some kids who in my days got expelled from schools. We know that things go a lot different now. I remember on one of the last few days of my senior year, not too many days before I graduated, I was out in the gym floor of my school. Saw like a bit much bigger, stouter kid getting up in a shorter kid's face and saying, "You want to rat on me? You want to rat on me?" And having the security guard go up to that kid and say to him, "And how would you like it if I ran up into your face?" So then they were back inside the foyer, and I heard the bigger kid hollering to the smaller kid, "I'll give you my address," and starts quoting his address to him. Then the security guard comes in and says to him, "If your hands go on him," then he interrupts to say to us, "Tell everybody, did I touch him? No." And the guard said, I'm not saying you did. I'm just saying, if your hands go on him, they're going in cuffs. So that's the way we kind of have learned to see things since our days. We know that these days things get a little different in the systems. Sometimes the problems have gotten worse. I still remember when the first school shooting took place here in my own state, not in my own town, but it was in my own state back in 1997 when the school shooting took place at the Heath High School in Paducah. It was right here in the state of Kentucky, to that matter, but it was in a different town, a little more out there. I know for one thing that there's been different stories to be told at different times. We don't really know what the condition of that kid's soul was who did the shooting, but it had been said in the news that there had been a certain church where he had made a profession of faith and been baptized. You know, we know that just because you walk down the aisle in church and go up and claim Christ, or even the fact that you get up and get baptized upon your profession of faith, that doesn't necessarily mean you truly trusted Jesus as your Savior. That's the way I've always learned it to be. So, of all things we see in life, say, and hear and do, I just want to say that it was like my uncle was the youth minister at the church where I was going to at that time, and I was still young and I was still in the youth group, and he talked to us about this event and talked about how the Lord might forgive this kid, but he'd still have to pay the penalty that is due to him on earth for it. And that's kind of what we think about when we think about King David, you know. King David, it was like he killed Uriah, committed adultery with Bathsheba, and Bathsheba was the wife of Uriah, so he committed adultery with the woman and got her pregnant and killed her husband to cover up for it. And that was the kind of thing where, when this little thing took place, we know the Lord forgave David. He could still serve God, he could still praise God, he could still preach and still be king, but what ended up happening in the end was that his baby died. The baby Bathsheba gave birth to, the baby died, and he knew the baby would be in heaven, so he fasted to try to keep the baby alive. But once the baby was dead, he started eating again, and he said, my child may not come to me, but I can go to him. So that was really meaning that one day in heaven, he'd see his child. And since then, he's been back to heaven, and he's been there for many years now. And yes, he's right there with his baby. We know that sometime after the time of that baby died, King David and Bathsheba as a couple had Solomon. They had King Solomon, and we know that Solomon was the king who wrote some of the books of the Bible. He wrote most of the book of Proverbs. He wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. He wrote the book of the Song of Solomon. So we know he was the next king over Jerusalem. Of course, he married wives from the foreign land that the Lord told him not to marry. And so it kind of ended up being a thing where they kind of bowed down to their own idols, and he bowed down to the idols with them, and he was forgiven for eternity. But just so happened that from that point on, no one in his family after him would rule over all of Judea. or all of Jerusalem, or all of Israel. So Israel was divided into two kingdoms, Samaria and Judah. So after that, it was like Solomon's son Rehoboam became the king of Judah, and the other king, Jeroboam, became the king of Samaria. So we see that there's been a lot of kings in this world, a lot of rebellion that's been led into. We see through the book that different kings lived different wretched lives, and the last king there ever was over Israel was Zedekiah. That was before the time of the Babylonian invasion, when Nebuchadnezzar came and invaded the land, and the Babylonians took over. This was God's punishment over Jerusalem for the rebellions that they committed. I will say that we're probably going to go a little further here, try to carve a little bit more into the other Mary, maybe go into the other Joseph as well. Might be able to keep this video long since I have a lot to share. Do think it's probably getting to the point that there will be some nights I'll be going out much less because so much has to go on in places, and there's just probably some stuff I might need to get away from and get a little break from. Just some stuff that might be a little too much for my ears, too much for my mind. So I know there's a certain Starbucks I go to where I know the girls really miss me there. That's all that works there in the evening, even though guys work during the day. I do think there comes a point in my life when God does want me to move sometimes, so I'd say yes for right now. It might be good that I take a little break from there. Might even decide after the video is over whether I want to try to go in a little bit later than I normally would, but don't know how that's going to be. We'll just kind of focus on the video right now and take care of this little carving we're doing. So that's how it's going to come along. That's how it's going to work. I say there were days when I made all these carvings and crafts, and it was like my grandmother, when she was a stroke patient, she lived in our house, and I mean, sometimes we had caretakers who came in to help us take care of her. They were all good to her, and sometimes given a chance while they were here, I'd bring up a lot of boxes of my crafts and give them a show of all the things I've made over the years, all the things I did. And I mean, I've made a whole lot more since then. A whole lot has been sold since then. A whole lot has gone out as gifts, and there's been a lot of people I've just had so much good to say about, So many people I just cared so much about. I'd send them little care packages, but these days it's like the care packages are getting to be another thing. It's just kind of to the point where the same old work has kind of lost its place in my life, and since I kind of have to move on and do things for business purposes, all of the old stuff that I used to make for care packages, it kind of all goes away into a treasury I keep in the shop now, and there's been quite a few to whom I've shared those little gifts I've had. There's been a lot to say to them, a lot to show to them, and all the ways I've enjoyed sharing all I've had with them. And these days, if a care package goes out, it is usually just to kind of give somebody with. what remains of the treasury, because all of those types of items that used to be for gift packages, they have all been discontinued. I've moved on to doing business work and moved on to another story. I've kind of gotten some thank you messages from people where I have learned that they were running out of room in which to store things, and so they all were just gracious enough to think that my work deserved to be with people who had room to show it, not to be put away in boxes like some people who were running out of their spaces have had to do with some of what they had of it. So I think it's always good that some of my old stuff gets to be shared around with new people. There have been more people come into my life with whom I've had so much more of it to share, just to kind of show that there was a little grace to come here and there, just to tell people little messages about my work and about what I do, and show them all that there's a lot of good work that goes into what I make. If you've seen the old critters, the old funny critters, all the old figurines, all the stuff I used to just make on the scroll saw, or maybe even saw out little shapes on the bandsaw and just glue them together and put little cutout faces on them. That work kind of went a long way and made its way into the lives of some of my friends and other people. So once we move on from that, we've got new good places to go in life, and I just can say that I can't wait to show some more and tell a little bit more of the world about the work of the crafting business. As you see, I want to show you all how this has come out so far. I just did this with both of the Marys. We've got one little Joseph left to do it with, so we're going to carve along on him. And sometimes I tell you, these knives, they may be getting so much older, they may require a little bit more of a more frequent sharpening than what we've had. So I say that the work is getting processed, the work is getting in the good, and it turns out, unfortunately, probably all of these knives must be dulling more easily than they used to, so I might even have to kind of end the video here and maybe go and sharpen these knives again. I do think it's getting to the point that I need to buy some new knives, because these ones are getting old and almost kind of scratched my forearm there with the knife, so kind of gotta think that. And I will show you. Here again is how the other Mary turned out. Here's how the Joseph turned out. So might kind of be about time to close the video down and sharpen the knives again, and maybe even go out to look for some new knives. Maybe. I think it's getting there. Goodbye.